Batman the Animated Series for the Game Boy is a unique game for a few reasons. It manages to stand out from the group of video game adaptations of the TV show, especially the ones released during the show's original run. At the same time, it may just have something in common with its protagonist in that it may just have a dual identity. This is Axle1324, the host of the iconic video games podcast, guest narrating for Makopowered, and welcome to Weekend Rental, where we look at games that, while not widely considered classics, or sometimes even good, are still worth examining and maybe even playing despite themselves. Initially, the reason for doing this video now was that this year is the 30th anniversary of Batman the Animated Series premiering on television. While we missed the actual anniversary of the premiere air date, September 15, 1992, Chris still wanted to get in on the fun before the end of the year. Also, for some reason, he associates the series more with winter and the holiday season, so here we are, I guess. Still, it's better than missing out entirely. Unfortunately, that is no longer the only reason for this video. Literally, as Chris was writing this, he learned of the unfortunate passing of Kevin Conroy on November 11th. He was the voice of Bruce Wayne and Batman in Batman the Animated Series, Justice League, the Batman Arkham games, and is considered by many as the definitive Batman. So instead of just being a video celebrating the anniversary of Batman the Animated Series, it has become a memorial for the man who defined Batman for an entire generation. I know when I read Batman comics, I hear his voice. I also hear his voice when playing video games based on the cartoon that introduced the world to his defining take on the Dark Knight, including the Game Boy game that came first. There are a few aspects to Batman the Animated Series on the Game Boy which make it immediately interesting. For one, it was released by Konami during the brief window when they held the Batman license after Sunsoft lost it following Batman Return of the Joker. Even here, Konami's license to make Batman games is unique because they only had the license to make them for the Nintendo systems. All of Sega's efforts would be published by Sega themselves. The other reason it's noteworthy is that it appears that they only had the license for just over 2 years. They would release Batman Returns for the NES in 1992 to coincide with the movie's release, but the SNES version of the game, which is significantly different and better than the NES version, wouldn't release until 1993. Batman the Animated Series for the Game Boy was released in the same year, in November. Then, a year later, in November 1994, they would release The Adventures of Batman and Robin for the SNES. And that's it. The next year, Acclaim would get the license and release Batman Forever for the SNES and Genesis, and well, let's just say that game may get its own weekend rental video at some point, but not because it's a hidden gem. No, really, for some reason, Chris wants to make videos on Batman Forever and Batman and Robin for the PS1. I think there's something wrong with him. Anyway, the Game Boy game holds a unique distinction among all of the Batman games to be based on the series. It's the only one to bear the simple name Batman the Animated Series. The SNES game the following year, along with Sega's efforts on the Genesis, Sega CD, and Game Gear in 1995 are all labeled The Adventures of Batman and Robin, as they came after the show got its first title change. In other words, the Game Boy game is the only official game to be based on those first Batman the Animated Series episodes. Well, sort of. See, despite being called The Adventures of Batman and Robin, the SNES game is remarkably faithful to the episodes of the first season of Batman the Animated Series. From the giant toy soldiers in Christmas with the Joker to the roller coaster fight against the Joker in Be a Clown, to the Riddler's maze of the Minotaur recreation of If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich?, to trying to avoid hurting civilians under the influence of Scarecrow's fear gas in Nothing to Fear, the SNES game offers the definitive experience of playing through the episodes of the cartoon. But we're not here to discuss the SNES game, and the Game Boy game takes a slightly different approach to the material. It seems to offer more of a remix of events of the episodes of the series. The levels still feel episodic in nature, just with some odd villain team-ups. Why are the Scarecrow and Mr. Freeze teaming up? Or Penguin and the Riddler? The interesting thing here is that while the SNES manual refers to its stages as stages, the manual for the Game Boy game frames the levels as episodes instead, maintaining the feel of an episodic TV show. Despite this remixed approach, it doesn't mean that the game doesn't stay true to the series. Looking at levels and the bosses associated with them, the Game Boy game has moments from the cartoon that the SNES game skips over. Because of that, breaking the game down by its episodes may allow us to better take a look at it. Admittedly, in the first level against the Joker, there isn't a whole lot there, aside from maybe, a small version of the teddy bear from Christmas with the Joker in The Bears That Explode. This opening area does have a decent battle against the Joker though, and does serve as a decent tutorial level to get players familiar with how Batman controls. Which is a good segue into talking about Batman as a playable character. So, Batman's abilities are, kinda limited. He can punch, throw batarangs when he has them, jump, wall jump, and shoot his grappling hook to attach to ceilings. That limited moveset is actually not a bad thing for a couple of reasons. First, remember that Batman from Batman the Animated Series doesn't rely heavily on gadgets. The one he uses the most is the grappling hook, and he has that here. Also remember that this was a game designed for the original Game Boy. Portability and simplicity were key, especially considering the concern over screen blur when something moves too fast. Having said that, it would have been nice if he had been given a jump kick, or a non-violent way to take down thugs like the bat rope or Ebola or something. But again, simplicity, so it's fine. At least it's truer to the character than the Game Boy game based on the '89 film, where he just straight up shoots everyone with a gun. On that note, there's a bit of a surprise on the next level, especially if you haven't read the manual. Even if his name isn't in the title, Robin shows up as a playable character in the Game Boy game. And to be honest, with more regularity than in the SNES game that does have his name on the box, as in more than once. His first appearance here is hunting down the Scarecrow, and there are a couple of unique things about this that we need to talk about. First, while Batman may not generally be okay with Robin tackling the Scarecrow alone, it makes sense here, because it riffs on the episode Fear of Victory, where Robin discovers that Scarecrow is using his fear toxin to rig college sports games. Second, this game does something almost no other Batman game has done. Makes Robin play significantly different from Batman. No, let's really stop to think about it. This is the first time Robin would be playable in a Batman game, at least as far as we were able to find in our research, and his mechanics are distinct from Batman's. In all the versions of The Adventures of Batman and Robin, Robin plays identical to Batman. The difference is strictly cosmetic. Well, all of them except for the Sega CD version, which is entirely vehicle-based for some reason. Anyway, same deal when Acclaim got hold of the license. Batman and Robin played almost identical in Batman Forever, despite Robin having a bow staff, something he never had in the movie, unless we're counting the Kung Fu laundry scene. Batman, Robin, and Batgirl all played the same in Batman and Robin for the PS1. The only difference is that Robin and Batgirl got motorcycles. Even in the Arkham games, the mechanics aren't that different from one character to another. Even playing as the Joker in the Arkham Challenge missions in Arkham Asylum maintains the same mechanics as Batman. Here though, Robin's mechanics not only differentiate him from Batman, they make sense for the character. As mentioned, Batman has his grappling hook, which he can fire straight up to cling to and grapple to ledges and ceilings above him. Robin can't do that because he doesn't have a grappling hook. Instead, he uses his acrobatic training and upbringing to grab a hold of those same ceilings and ledges by hand and swing across them. Something Batman can't do, not having grown up in the circus. The best part is that Robin's levels are constructed around this mechanic. It's not just a gimmick or a one-off novelty stage. Sure, it may seem like a small thing, but considering so many games see the dynamic duo as interchangeable, it's nice to see them treated as separate characters with different skill sets. It's just surprising to see it on the Game Boy first. Oh, quick aside, speaking of character moments that are nice to see, it's fun to see Summer Gleason in the cutscenes here. Again, it's the first time she would make an appearance in a Batman game, and having her here adds to the authenticity of Batman the Animated Series experience. Once players take control of Batman again after Robin defeats Scarecrow and presumably detoxes after those fear gas doses to the face, the Mr. Freeze level plays out as an extended pastiche of the lone Mr. Freeze episode at the time, Heart of Ice. The goons Batman fights wear the same parkas, and the boss fight with Freeze incorporates the cannon he uses to assault the skyscraper in the episode. Batman and the player's victory is even attributed to Freeze's suit being compromised during the fight. Then there's the Poison Ivy level. There's a Catwoman level that leads into it, but we'll loop around to that for reasons. But yeah, both the SNES and Game Boy game have a Poison Ivy level, complete with the same giant plant boss at the end, but the Game Boy version actually directly pulls from the first appearance of the series, Pretty Poison. See, the motivation for Batman and the player to navigate the level and capture Poison Ivy is because she has kidnapped Harvey Dent, who has not become Two-Face yet. While this isn't the same as poisoning him, as she did in the episode, it is not only a nice tie to the show, but it also explains the absence of Two-Face as a boss in the game when so many of Batman's other rogues are present. Moving on to the Riddler stage, it's by far the most elaborate and maybe the most interesting as well. In this stage, Batman has to navigate a labyrinth, except the player isn't told that they're in a maze. Instead, they and Batman are left to figure it out for themselves when they realize they've chosen the wrong path, and the areas have started to loop. It's an interesting way of having the player puzzle out the nature of the level without overly signposting it, and it is definitely in keeping with the Riddler's MO. This looping is both more than just video games logic, while at the same time being exactly that. What I mean by this is that when combined with the aggressive chess pieces found throughout the maze, there is a hint at the level's true nature. It is fully revealed when the player fights the Riddler himself and realizes that they are not physically fighting him. Batman and the Riddler sit in VR chairs at the bottom of the boss arena while VR versions of themselves are fighting in the arena proper. Because of that, the Riddler teleports around the arena, splits into multiple copies of himself, and shoots homing fireballs at Batman and the player. In other words, the Riddler's level recreates the VR challenge Batman faces in the episode, What is Reality? And when the player defeats him, the Riddler is left comatose in his seat, just as in the episode, while the Penguin runs off. Batman and Robin give chase to the Penguin after the Riddler is defeated, but this level is something we'll actually swing back to because there's something else going on here. So let's skip that for now. The final episode has Batman squaring off against the Joker again. Sort of. See, the final episode isn't so much a level as it is just a boss fight, but Batman and the player don't take on the Joker directly. Instead, they find an interesting reinterpretation of the Captain Clown robot from the episode The Last Laugh, and all of this takes place in the garbage dump area from that episode of the cartoon. When Captain Clown is defeated, he malfunctions and knocks out the Joker, ending the game. Going through all the episodes in the game, it's interesting to see how the dev team curated the experience and reinterpreted the sequences from the show in specific episodes as gameplay sections. It's also interesting to see how they structured each episode. In each one, Batman or Robin starts out by moving through the streets of Gotham before reaching the stage proper for each villain. These segments aren't simply retreads of each other either. They are different each time. For a game that is not open world, these segments serve a dual purpose. They build a sense of Gotham City for the player as both a setting and character in its own right, establishing that Batman and Robin are part of the city, moving through it instead of separate from it. Graphically, these sequences also tie back to the cartoon in that they are always depicted as dark, shadowy, and brooding. Remember, the backgrounds in the cartoon were painted on black paper in order to give them a moodier aesthetic. Speaking of the graphics, let's take a look at the character sprites again. Honestly, in this regard, Batman himself is probably the weakest of the bunch. Admittedly, it's difficult to nail the fine details of the animated version of Batman on a dot matrix screen 2.6 inches in size, so that's fair. All of the other characters look distinctly like their cartoon counterparts, however. Joker, Robin, Scarecrow, Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, and the Riddler are all fantastic representations of their cartoon designs. Again, remember that the Game Boy screen resolution was only 160 by 144 pixels. Just over half of that of the NES's 256 by 240. This doesn't just apply to the in-game sprites either. Can we just take a moment to appreciate how the devs tried their best to reproduce the opening to the show on the humble Game Boy, complete with the theme music? The Game Boy's monochromatic screen gives the cutscenes, which do look pulled straight from the cartoon, an almost film noir feeling to them by casting them in black and white. Or green and white, I guess, if you're playing on an original Game Boy model. Which is great, because you're going to be seeing the same cutscenes a lot. Especially because this game is hard. As in, Batman hard. As in, surprisingly hard. Especially for a Konami Game Boy game from this time period. Sure, there are only 5 episodes, but they are hard as nails. Enemies are placed strategically to make jumping to platforms tricky and potentially damage-inducing, whether from direct contact or the projectiles they fire. In the Riddler's maze, the chess pieces will respawn without warning, sometimes right where Batman is standing. Poison Ivy stage has plants hanging from the ceiling, shooting... what exactly are they shooting? Pods? Nuts? Korok seeds? Pollen? Can we just take a moment to say they might not be shooting at all? Maybe they're sneezing. Anyway, they're shooting at you while you're trying to avoid floors covered in spikes. It also doesn't help that the devs were particularly stingy with extra lives. Because there are none. You get 1 life. That's it. Okay, that's not entirely accurate. You do get 3 continues, but that's it. On top of that, there are no passwords or any other way to save your progress. You are expected to play through the whole game in 1 sitting. Also, why is the penguin the hardest boss in the game? Seriously, fully a fifth of the playthrough footage recorded for this video was just fighting the penguin. He flies around shooting a ridiculous number of bullets from his umbrella gun, with little to no cover to avoid his shots. Captain Clown is a victory lap by comparison. Actually, there may be a very good reason why the penguin is the hardest boss in the game. So remember how we also skipped past Catwoman stage and moved right from Mr. Freeze to Poison Ivy? We did this so that we can talk about the Catwoman and Penguin together. See, while all of the stages for the other villains carry familiar elements from the episodes of the show where they appear, Catwoman's and the Penguin's do not. Catwoman's stage consists of chasing Catwoman through a burning building, stopping to fight with her at various points. The Penguin, on the other hand, has Robin chasing him as he ascends a tall building, and then Batman fighting him inside a blimp. The thing here is that the Penguin fights Batman while driving a vehicle that looks like a giant duck. Who says penguins can't fly? If these elements all sound familiar, they should, just not from the cartoon. Keep in mind that this is just speculation because finding documentation for a game developed in this time period is not easy. But it feels like this game may have started out as a Batman Returns game. Remember, the SNES version of Batman Returns released the same year as this game, and the Game Boy was the only system to not get a Batman Returns game. Even the Atari Lynx got a Batman Returns game. Catwoman's stage makes more sense then, as it resembles the scene outside of Shrek's department store from Batman Returns. The Penguin boss battle also makes more sense in that context because it explains the duck vehicle, and if he was originally intended to be the final boss of the game, why he's so difficult to defeat, and why there's no actual level before the final fight with the Joker. If this is the case, then the conversion to a Batman the Animated Series game is an impressive one, and also makes sense. Batman the Animated Series was a smash hit, and if this game was in the pipeline, but not close to completion, it would be easier and more cost-effective to convert it from a Batman Returns to a Batman the Animated Series game, since assets and levels would already be in place and just need to be tweaked. Think the situation discussed in the video for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves for the NES. Batman the Animated Series is an interesting approach to a tie-in game for a TV series. It took an episodic approach long before games like Alan Wake tried to do similar, giving it a uniquely TV feel when compared to other tie-in games of the time. Because of that, the fact that it largely nails the aesthetic of the show, and because it curates moments from the show and offers them as gameplay, it is a guided tour through those groundbreaking early episodes of the cartoon. This tour feels particularly timely and nostalgic on the 30th anniversary of the show's premiere. While the difficulty may be enough to dissuade some, if you're a fan of the show, it still makes for a good weekend rental. And no matter what, it's still better than Batman Forever. Fight me. This is Axle1324, narrating on behalf of Makopowered Gaming. Thank you all for watching.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.